In 1925, a clay tablet passed through the hands of a dealer in Baghdad, and then it disappeared. No museum recorded it. No private collector ever admitted to holding it. The only proof it ever existed is a single photograph and a partial translation, scribbled into the margins of a British field notebook that resurfaced decades later. According to that translation, the tablet was carved by one man near the end of his life. He called himself the last who still remembered, and what he claimed to remember was not a legend passed down by firelight. It was a rebellion, a revolt of the gods, written by someone who said he watched it happen. If you believe history like this deserves to be recovered instead of buried, subscribe to the channel right now. Every week we pull one more lost piece of the record back into the light. Now let's go back to that tablet and the man who carved it. The man left no name we can confirm. The notebook translator simply called him the scribe of Eridu, because the tablet named that one city more than any other. Eridu was real. It is one of the oldest settlements ever uncovered in southern Iraq, and the ancient Sumerians themselves believed it was the first city in the world, the place where kingship first came down from the heavens. If the scribe was telling the truth, he was writing from inside the oldest human city his civilization knew of, and he was writing because he was afraid the truth was about to be erased. He begins the tablet with a warning. He says the official records are already incomplete. He says the priest had started shortening the story, cutting out the parts that frightened people, reshaping the gods into something easier to worship. He claims the version carved into the temple walls was a cleaned version. His tablet, he says, is the long one, the version before the editing. To understand what he carved, you have to understand the world he believed in. The Sumerians described two classes of gods. The first were the Anunnaki, the high gods, the ones who held authority, who divided the sky and the earth and the underworld between them. Below them were the Igigi, a younger generation of gods. And the Igigi were not rulers, the Igigi were workers. This part is not speculation. It survives in a genuine Babylonian text called the Atrahasis Epic, written down well over 3,000 years ago. In that text, the Igigi are forced to do the hard physical labor of the world. They dig the beds of the Tigris and the Euphrates. They hollow out the canals. They pile up the mountains of earth. The text says they carried that load for 40 years, day and night, without rest. The lost tablet of the scribe of Eridu describes the same labor, but it adds something the Atrahasis epic only hints at. The scribe writes that the Igigi were not simply tired, they were deceived. He claims they had been promised the work would end, that the rivers would be finished and they would be released. And every time the work was nearly done, the Anunnaki measured it again, found it lacking, and ordered them to dig deeper. The scribe describes the conditions in detail. He says the Igigi worked in shifts that never truly stopped, because the moment one group collapsed, another was driven into the trench. He says the baskets of earth they carried were weighed, and if a god carried less than the day before, his ration of food was cut. He claims the canals of Mesopotamia, the same canals that fed every Sumerian city, were not dug by men at all in the oldest memory of his people. They were dug by gods who were treated worse than men. And the scribe says, this is the first thing the priests removed from the record because a farmer who knows the canal beside his field was cut by a slave revolt looks at that canal very differently. He also writes that the Igigi began to talk among themselves, not loudly, not all at once. He describes years of quiet conversation in the bottom of the trenches, where the Anunnaki rarely went, while the work went on above them. The scribe calls this the slow fire. The labour was the loud thing everyone could see. The talking was the thing nobody important was listening to. And the talking is what actually ended the gods' world as they knew it. According to the scribe, the breaking point came at night. The Atrahasis epic records this moment too. The Igigi look at their tools, the baskets and the digging spades, and they make a decision. They set the tools on fire, they burn the equipment of their own slavery, and then as a single mass they march on the house of the chief god. In the surviving Babylonian version, that chief god is Enlil. The Igigi surround his temple in the dark. Enlil's gatekeeper bolts the doors. Enlil wakes, sees his house ringed by a furious army of gods, and panics. The text describes him close to tears, demanding to know why his own children have come to make war on him. The lost tablet describes that same siege, but it slows the moment down. The scribe writes that the Igigi did not shout. He says they stood in silence around the temple, thousands of them holding torches made from the burning handles of their own tools. He says the light of that fire was the first time the Anunnaki inside the temple understood the size of the workforce they had been commanding. They had counted the Igigi as numbers in a ledger. They had never seen them all standing in one place. And when they finally did, the high gods were afraid, because the thing that does your labor is also the thing that knows exactly how your world is held together. But the scribe of Eridu claims to know what was said inside the temple. And this is where his version becomes something the museums never wanted in circulation. He writes that the Anunnaki, trapped and frightened, asked the Igigi a single question. They asked who started the revolt. They wanted one name, a leader they could punish, so the rest could be forgiven and sent back to work. And the Igigi refused to give one. The scribe says they answered as one voice. Every one of us declared war. The labor is killing all of us. We will not hand you a name so you can pretend the rest of us are innocent. There is no leader. There is only the work, and the work has to end. Think about what that is. According to this carving, the first recorded labor strike in human imagination did not happen between people. It happened between gods. And it ended not with a leader being executed, but with the rulers realizing they could not punish their way out of it. The scribe writes that the standoff outside the temple lasted until morning. He says the high gods sent one of their own out to speak, not to threaten, but to ask what the Igigi wanted. And the answer was not gold, and not power, and not revenge. The answer was simply that the work had to be taken off them. The scribe records this as the moment that Anunnaki understood they had lost, not because they were defeated in a battle, but because there was nothing they could offer that would put a god back in the trench willingly. The labor itself was the problem. And a problem that cannot be bribed and cannot be punished can only be replaced. So the Anunnaki did something else. In the Atrahasis epic, the solution is famous, and it is the reason this story still matters. The high gods decide they will not force the Igigi back to the canals. Instead, they will build a replacement worker, a new kind of being, one that can carry the baskets and dig the earth so the gods never have to again. That being is us. The text is direct about it. The mother goddess, called Nintu or Mami, is told to create a creature to bear the load. She mixes clay with the blood and the flesh of a god who is killed specifically for this purpose, a god the text says possessed intelligence. From that mixture, humanity is shaped. We are, in the words of the epic, made to carry the work the gods refuse to carry themselves. The scribe of Eridu lingers on this part longer than any other. He writes that the creation of mankind was not a moment of wonder. It was a solution to a management problem. The high gods had a workforce that could organize, that could refuse, that could surround a temple in the night. So they designed a new workforce that could not. Something strong enough to dig, intelligent enough to follow instructions, but short enough lived and scattered enough that it would never gather thousands of torches around a single house. He says the Anunnaki did not want better workers. They wanted workers who would never become a problem again. The lost tablet agrees on the recipe: clay and the blood of a sacrificed god. But the scribe of Eridu adds a final detail, and it is the detail the notebook translator underlined 3 times. The scribe writes that the murdered god was not chosen at random. He claims the god who was killed to make mankind was one of the Igigi, one of the rebels. The text says the Anunnaki took the very being who had stood in the front line of the revolt and used his blood to build a slave race that would never rebel the same way again. In other words, according to this carving, humanity was engineered out of the rebellion. We were made from the one who fought back, but made carefully. made smaller, made obedient. The scribe says the intelligence in our blood is the inheritance of the rebel God, and the labour in our hands is the punishment that God escaped. That is the claim, that every human being alive is walking proof of a strike the gods both lost and won at the same time. The scribe does not present this as good news. The final section of the tablet is the part the translator found hardest to render, because the language stops being grand and becomes personal. The scribe stops describing gods. He starts describing himself. He writes that he is old. He writes that the temples around him are already teaching the shorter version, the safe version, the one where the gods are kind, and the creation of mankind was a gift. He says the children of Eridu no longer know they were built as a workaround. They no longer know that somewhere in their making is a god who refused to be a slave. And he says he is carving the long version into clay precisely because clay outlasts priests. Then the record stops. The photograph shows the tablet was broken across the lower third. Whatever the scribe wrote as his last lines did not survive in the image. The notebook translator added only one comment beneath the final readable sentence. He wrote, "The rest was lost before I reached it." The photograph itself is worth describing because it is all we have. It shows a single rectangular tablet, darker than most museum pieces, with writing pressed deep into the surface in tight, even rows. The translator noted that the script did not match the neat temple style he expected. He wrote that the wedges were heavier near the end, as if the person carving them was pressing harder, or tiring, or running out of time. He believed the tablet was the work of one hand from the first line to the last, not a copy made by students, not a temple commission. One person carving until the clay ran out or the hand gave up. So what do we actually have here? We have a genuine ancient story, the Igigi rebellion, recorded in real Babylonian texts you can read in translation today. That part is history. The strike of the lesser gods, the burning of the tools, the siege of Enlil's house, and the creation of humanity to replace the workers, all of that is genuinely written into the Atrahasis epic. And then we have a tablet that supposedly went further, a tablet that named no leader because the rebels refused to name one. A tablet that claimed mankind was made from a rebel's blood. A tablet that accused the priesthood of editing the gods into something gentler. A tablet that vanished in 1925 and exists now only as a photograph and a dead man's handwriting in a notebook margin. Skeptics have a simple explanation. They say the lost tablet was never real. They say a translator in the 1920s, surrounded by genuine Sumerian texts, simply wrote a more dramatic version and attributed it to an invented scribe. Forgeries like that were not rare in that era. The Baghdad antiquities trade moved fast and asked very few questions, but there is a detail that keeps the case from closing. The notebook translation uses a phrase for the moment the Igigi refused to name a leader. Every one of us declared war. For decades, scholars assumed that line was the translator's own invention because it did not appear in any tablet known at the time. Then later, excavations recovered more fragments of the Atrahasis epic, and in those newer fragments, the Igigi say almost exactly that. Every single one of us gods declared war. A line that should not have existed in a 1920s notebook turned out to match a tablet dug up much later. That does not prove the lost tablet was real. It could be coincidence. It could be that the translator had access to a fragment we have since forgotten about. But it does mean the notebook contains at least one detail the translator could not easily have invented. And if that detail is genuine, the question becomes uncomfortable. What else in that notebook was copied from something real? We will probably never know. The tablet is gone. The dealer is gone. The translator is gone. All that remains is the claim itself, carved by a man who said he was the last one who remembered, in a city his people called the first city in the world. He said the priests would shorten the story. He said the children would forget they were built from a rebel. He said clay outlasts the people who try to edit it. And then his tablet was lost anyway. Maybe that is the real ending of the Igigi rebellion. Not the strike, not the creation of mankind, but a single old man thousands of years later carving the uncut version into clay, trusting the clay to survive him, and being wrong. If this is the kind of history you think deserves to be dug back up, stay with the channel. The record is full of tablets that went missing at the exact moment they started saying something inconvenient. There is another one waiting, and that story is already on screen.